Alrighty, hi everybody. Welcome to our February edition of our FLT Connect series. So tonight's topic is going to be all about the history of the Letchworth Area Canal, and we're going to hear a little bit about that from Jules Hopting.
Am I good to transition?
Yes, you're all set.
Okay. Can everybody see the screen? Thumbs up. You can all hear me pretty good too? Okay. All right. So this is on the Genesee Valley Canal, clinging to a canyon. As an overview, today it is Genesee Valley Greenway State Park, and this corridor has gone through multiple uses as different like forms of transportation. So initially, it was a canal in the 1840s and 70s. As you can see, this is a view from Inspiration Point in Letchworth, where it's literally on the side of a canyon. Not much of an exaggeration with the title. And then it was repurposed as a railroad directly after, and that was its longest lifespan from the 1880s to the 1960s. And then in the 90s, moving forward, there's been an effort to turn it into a greenway trail. And then a greenway is, as I'm sure most of you know, a multi-use trail. So you can walk on it, bike on it, ski on it, snowmobile on it, horse riding, etc. Ooh, can I not do that? Is it this one? Let's try that one. All right, so what is the connection between today's Genesee Valley Greenway State Park, or the Greenway Trail, and the Finger Lakes Trail? So this is the map of today of the Greenway Trail. Can you see my mouse when I move it around at all, by the way? Okay,
Yeah, we
good.
can.
I know whether or not I should be relying on you seeing that. So general view of New York State and then a close-up of it. It's very much a work in progress. So the green is complete Greenway Trail, orange is off trail, and then blue are offshoots, including the Finger Lakes Trail. So this is just a screenshot from your website of the Finger Lakes Trail and the branch that goes through Letchworth. So if you zoom in a bit more, we get to this little section around what is known as the slide area, which if you don't know what it is, you'll find out later on. And this is the overlap between the Greenway and the FLT right now. And then I'll continue on a little bit in that direction. This is one of the most engineeringly interesting sections of the Genesee Valley Canal. So, my connection. Why am I the one who's talking to you about this topic? So I grew up along the Erie Canal in Albee, New York. So it's still active to this day. And I would cross it over every day going to school. I always liked it. I went for walks along it, but I didn't necessarily know its significance or its historic significance or where the trail next to it went. And then the pandemic came around, and a lot of people did things that they didn't think they were going to end up doing. Uh, and so for me, I got the idea, like, what if I walked from like Albion to Holly on the Erie Canal and back in a day? What if I did that? Would that be crazy? 20 miles. And then I did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like I can do that. And it was very rewarding. And I was like, all right, what if I went from Holly to the next town and back? And it kept snowballing and snowballing from there. And I did it on my days off. And then by the end of 2020, I had walked the entire Erie Canal, technically twice, and walked across New York State, not including the on-road sections. And I read a lot of signs along the way, and I learned a lot about this canal and its impact on the state. And I could never look at the state the same way again, and I fell in love with it. And I also just really fell in love with long distance trails. So that January, afterwards in 2021, I was on break from college and I just decided to go hiking in Letchworth. I was like, what's a long, hard trail near me? So I'm like, I'm gonna do all 15 miles of the Gorge Trail today. And then again, I stopped and read the signs. And then I got to Inspiration Point, and there's a sign about the Genesee Valley Canal. And I was like, wait a minute, there's more than one. There was another canal? Crazy. And then the thing that I'm still not over and never will be, and I'll explain why they did this later on. Oh my gosh, why did they put a canal on the side of a cliff? That doesn't seem like a very good place to put it. And the sign said that if I went to Trail 7 in Letchworth, which is also part of the Genesee Valley Greenway, that I would be able to see some of the canal remains. And I did that. And I was like, all right, you know what? Comes around next summer, I'm going to do the entire Genesee Valley Greenway. Um, and then I go to Ohio just to randomly, I just like hiking. And I hear about the Ohio and Erie Canal, and I do all 80 miles of that. So between all those different long distance walks and just like regular walks in the evening, I have walked over 1,000 miles on a towpath of various canal trails from very abandoned to active to this day. So that's my frame of knowledge for this. And then in addition to that, I've done like different chunks of the Finger Lakes Trail. I've done a bit of the North Country Trail, and my current like long distance project is the Bruce Trail in Ontario, Canada. So I'm about halfway through that. So I love the satisfaction of the really long connections. Anyway, um, so actually, that ended up leading me to my current job. I interned for Parks and Trails New York PTNY, who partially runs the Erie Canalway Trail. And then that led me to a job in the area. I worked part-time in history in Letchworth for 2 summers, and then I got offered 4 months ago to work full-time as an educator for the Genesee region of state parks. So I work in Letchworth, and I was hired on specifically for Genesee Valley Greenway. So I grew up next to a canal. I got bored in the pandemic. I walked a lot, and now I have a job, and I get to talk about it. So kind of a interesting trajectory. All right, so enough about me. Let's get into kind of the background of the canal era and the canal craze. So what really started this is the Erie Canal. Um, so admittedly, it is my first love, but I do spend time on this because it is just so historically significant. So this is an eerily good catalyst for the canal craze. So, if you didn't know, this is what New York State's canal system looked like in the mid 1800s. There were a lot of canals, and a lot of them are not there today. Most of them are not there today. So, this is the Erie Canal, which is the horizontal one, and then the branch canals come off the sides of it. So, like the Genesee Valley Canal over here. So, what was the idea of the Erie Canal? What were they trying to do? So, at the time, there was this movement to go west in the US, and transportation just wasn't great. Roads were not good. They were muddy, they were ruddy, and all that. And the idea of how do we connect the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Erie is kind of the objective of making a canal. And then they're like, well, there's these obstacles in the way, right? There's these uh, Adirondack Mountains, there's the Catskill Mountains, there's the Appalachian Mountains, and then this is where New York State has the geographic jackpot of the Mohawk Valley because it's the only break in those mountains. So the person who is credited with coming up with the route of the Erie Canal is actually a flour merchant from Rochester. His name is Jesse Holly. And he wasn't doing so good with his flour merchant stuff because he couldn't get it to the market fast enough. And he was like, huh, if only there was a way to do this. So he ends up going to prison, debtor's prison. While he's in debtor's prison, he figures out what he thinks would be the most obvious way to put a canal, and that is in the flattest part of the state. So you go through the Great Lakes Plains, through Buffalo, Rochester, head through the Mohawk Valley, and then hook the canal into the Hudson River down to New York. And he writes about this in a few newspapers under the name of Hercules, actually. That was his pen name. And it catches the attention of Governor DeWitt Clinton of New York State. And there was a lot of pushback on this. One of the most famous quotes is from Thomas Jefferson calling the Erie Canal a little short of madness. People thought this was a crazy idea, that it would not work. But DeWitt Clinton goes along with it anyway and pushes for it. Um, So it's often referred to as Clinton's Ditch or Clinton's Folly or some other words for the original versions of the Erie Canal. And it takes 8 years to make. It starts in July 4th, 1817, and opens up in 1825, which does mean, because it is 2025, that this is 200 years of the Erie Canal. So you'll probably see some events and things related to that once you are aware of it to celebrate 200 years of this waterway. So the story that I read on so many signs about the opening of the Erie Canal is DeWitt Clinton doing the wedding of the waters. So he picks up a bucket of water from Lake Erie and he floats it on all the way down to the Hudson River, goes in the Atlantic Ocean, dumps it into the ocean, then picks up the ocean water and comes all the way back and dumps it out. The wedding of the waters. Now, that's a really cool story, but the one that they don't tell you, which I think is so much more interesting, and kind of gives more into the significance of the opening of this waterway, is that they lined cannons along the entire thing, and they were all within earshot of each other. So as soon as one cannon went off, they would set off another one, and another one, and another one. So when DeWitt Clinton is leaving Buffalo, within 90 minutes, it is communicated to New York City that he has left Buffalo through the cannons going off. And this happens several years before Morse code is invented. I did actually see a little news story claiming that Samuel Morse was inspired by this event to create Morse code, but I haven't seen enough evidence on that one, but it's a fun idea. So it went up with a bang, quite literally, and it was a massive success. Transportation time goes down significantly. The cost of freight goes down 90%. New York City goes from being the seventh largest port in the US to number one. And it has an influence on everything. It's a spreader of religion, like Mormonism and spiritualism have a tie to it. It had a role in establishing the Adirondacks as a preserved area. It spread invasive species, which is maybe not the most great thing, but it did that too. Lots of ideas. It was considered like the internet of its time, just how quickly things could go. And, you know, if you look at a map, a population map of New York State today, and you look at it, the route of the Erie Canal, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Schenectady, Albany, New York City, right along the route. It's like there's a connection or something. This state is very, very heavily tied to the canal. And on top of that, this was made by people who were kind of winging it as they went. There was no schools for canal engineers. They kind of started in Rome, New York, and went on either way and made up a lot of it as they went. So this is such like a classic American movie story to me in terms of we did it and it was great. So naturally, the rest of the state wants to mimic this. They're looking at the Erie Canal and all its like boom cities, and they're like, "Hey, we're over here in the middle of nowhere, and we don't got good roads, and we want a canal too. That's gonna work for us too, right?" So these are a whole bunch of lateral canals that came off of it, and then the one that I'm going to be focusing on more is, of course, the Genesee Valley Canal. And it didn't just extend to New York State. It expanded even further into more of the US. So there were over 3,000 miles of canals made between like 1815 and 1850, which is if you were to drive from the West Coast to the East Coast today within that time frame. It was an absolute canal craze. So I don't know how well you can see it. The blue lines on this map indicate rivers. The red lines indicate canals that were made that are abandoned. And the orange lines indicate canals that are still active to this day. So most of them are not there. So this is the canal system of New York State today that is still active. It was used more commercially until about the 1950s when two things came along that really kind of smushed it from a like commercial traffic. And that would be the St. Lawrence Seaway in Canada, which had even bigger and deeper canals that could get you to the same waterways, and the New York State Thruway system for trucking traffic. Those kind of killed Erie. And then in the 90s, more so, this movement picks up to like repurpose the canal corridor and turn it into like the Erie Canalway Trail and get cycling traffic on it, or you can kayak through the whole thing if you want to this day. Um, Kind of more of a tourism and historic aspect is the direction that it's been moving in within the last 30 years. So, canal infrastructure. So the section where the canal, the Greenway can the Genesee Valley Canal intersects with the FLT is one of the most interesting sections. So just kind of a little overview of canal infrastructure before I get into that. So what was the purpose of making the Genesee Valley Canal? It was to connect the Erie Canal in Rochester to the Allegheny River in Olean. And then the Allegheny River would go into the Ohio and then the Mississippi. So the grand idea is to connect like the Mississippi River to the Lake Erie. There was a few things that was dependent on it being made in a timely manner, the Allegheny River being navigable because at the time it was not. And that was kind of the hope that those things would happen. So in the northern section is a lot more, as it is to this day, very productive agricultural area, lots of grain, things of that sort. And the southern section was a lot of lumber. This canal was a lot of lumber mainly. And then included was also the side cut to Dansville as well. So there was like over 100 petitions put in for this, for them to make this canal. So why the Erie Canal's still around, the Genesee Valley Canal's not. Why was Erie successful and why was the Genesee Valley Canal not? So part of it is timing. The Erie Canal is what catalyzed the canal craze. The Genesee Valley Canal was started a decade after the Erie Canal opened. It was starting to be developed in a time when railroads were starting to take over for certain types of transportation. Um, and then the other one is topography. They put the Erie Canal in the flattest part of the state. They put the Genesee Valley Canal up a hill. Water does not naturally go uphill. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of resources. So the Genesee Valley Canal is actually the highest canal ever made in the United States at almost 1,000 feet. And I wanted to give you an idea of what that actually looks like. So if you are familiar with Letchworth State Park, and I will be referencing Letchworth a lot throughout this presentation, Archery Field Overlook is what you see right when you come in the Castile entrance, and that is the steepest part of the canyons within Letchworth at about 550 feet. So the Genesee Valley Canal, it was over 100 miles long, but within 80 miles of it, it did not go up one archery field overlook, but almost two. That's pretty high to make a whole bunch of water go up. So it was really an engineering marvel of its time. So what were its dimensions? What was its prism? So a canal prism is kind of like an upside down trapezoid. So it would have been 40 feet long on top and 4 feet deep. Um, and a lot of people are like, hey, that sounds kind of small, but it was actually in line with what would have been standard at the time. The Erie Canal was initially 40 feet long, and then it's been enlarged and rerouted over time. So today, the smallest it's going to be is about 120 feet long. But back in the 1820s, it would have been 40 feet. And then part of the reason why they chose smaller dimensions too is because they knew they were putting it up a big hill and more water would be required if they made it any bigger. And then this is Erie being expanded over the years as a reference on the bottom. So in case you didn't grow up next to a canal and drive over it every day, this is what a canal prism looks like. And that would be it in its off season when it's drained and when it's full. So canals, at least in this part of the world, do not work in the winter because of this thing called like freezing temperatures and water freezes. So they are drained. And that was part of the reason why railroads started to take over in popularity. So in addition to the canal prism, you have the towpath on the side. So the towpath today is often where canal trails are placed. When I was a kid, I thought it was called a towpath because it's a trail and you have like toes on your feet. So it's like a footpath, like a towpath. Nope. It's called a towpath because back in the day you would have had mainly mules and then there would be a rope attached to them to a barge and they'd be towing the barge along the towpath. So if you don't know now, you know. So another infrastructure is an aqueduct, which is kind of like a bridge, but instead of transporting like a train or a car or a person, it's transporting water on top of water. So this is a restored one on an old version of the Erie Canal, just to give you like an aerial example of what it would look like. The best one we have along the Greenway is near Rochester, in Black Creek Culvert, and that's kind of the remains of it today. So this is a side profile of the Genesee Valley Canal. Over here is Rochester, which would be going into Lake Ontario, and then over here are the Allegheny, the Allegheny Hills. So it's going up a hill about 1,000 feet. And oh, one second. So if you see like these little kind of notches that kind of look like little stairs, they kind of are. Those would have been the over 100 locks that existed for the Genesee Valley Canal. So lock is pretty much just like a big stair. This is a modern one on the Erie Canal, so you can see the water levels down here and it's up there. It's pretty much just a step for the boat. Oh, I got a little bar. Let me move this so it's not in my way. Okay. And then there's another one in the distance. So this is an aerial of that same area. So you can see how it's just kind of using those locks to go up a hill. And then here's a little graphic of how it works. So even though overall it's kind of more like a staircase effect, each lock itself is more like an elevator. So the boat goes in, like imagine you're walking into an elevator, the door closes, and then a rope is being used to take you to the floor above or below. Similar concept, but water displacement is being used to raise you above or below. And the reason I spend time on that is because, again, there was over 100 locks on this canal, and I want to give you an idea of just how much water is going to be required to run this thing. So again, modern example. This is one of the locks along the canal I saw in Ohio that does have the same dimensions as the Genesee Valley Canal. So I think this is a really good example of what the Genesee Valley Canal would have looked like in the day. And then these are kind of the locks that we have. So very far removed from what they would have been. And I personally would have no idea what I was looking at if I did not have other references. So that's why I like to include them. This is the best lock we have along the Greenway today. Again, in near the Rochester area. And then this is the towpath and then where the canal would have been. You can see some of those blocks and infrastructure. And then again, because they were literally through towns, there are definitely a lot in Nunde specifically where there's just like a lock in the town and there's just a power wash station behind it and a storage unit and it's just kind of sitting there. And that's definitely a common thing along abandoned canals is they're just kind of go through the town and it's just kind of there. So kind of how big was it? So it's 40 feet wide. The lock's going to be 15, 90 feet long. And a lot of people are more curious about the boats. Essentially, the boats had to fit into the lock, so they had to be the correct dimensions for that. So they would have been 14 by 70 on average. So that's the space that people are working in, who are the canal men and all that. And then this is from the New York State Canal Society. They said they had a photo of one that would be up to scale in a parking lot. And I said, can you please send it to me? Because then this just gives you a way better idea of like how big it would have been. because it's in a parking lot. You got some vehicles for reference and all that. So, timeline of making this canal. It's a little longer than you think it would be. This canal's a little bit of a soap opera. In that it goes on, its story is so much longer than you think it's going to be. It's got so many twists and turns. It's very dramatic. It's got the highest of highs. It's got the lowest of lows. It's a very sassy waterway. I'm gonna need to move another box so I can see my screen. It is authorized in 1836, so about 11 years after the Erie Canal opens. It takes them 3 years to get to Mount Morris, and another two to get to Dansville. Going pretty good, going pretty smooth, and then this thing happens that stunts a lot of progress, and that is the stop and tax law. So New York State and all of its canals and its branching was spending millions and millions of dollars on canals. And that was kind of a problem. They were kind of running out of money. And the Genesee Valley Canal happened to be the number one in loss for operating. It was like the worst one financially for New York State. So in 1942, they just decided that they were going to stop construction on all of their canals. They could do any maintenance work on active ones, but anything under construction, they were just going to stop working on it until they had money to fix it again, to continue. And that went on for 5 years. So for 5 years, any work that could have been done on the canal or like all the locks that had been laid down, any infrastructure work just sat there for 5 years exposed to the elements and people who might have stolen something because they thought they were nice materials. So the work continues along. By 1850, there is already a railroad in their final destination, proving as competition. Takes them 6 more years to get to the railroad, 20 years after it was authorized. It takes them 6 more years to actually get to the river, which, by the way, the river was never made navigable. So it was kind of just a really long effort. This project was estimated to take 5 years. It took 26. So that's like if it got authorized in 1999 and finished this year. So it's used for another 16 years before it is abandoned. And then, they're looking at this route. They're looking at all the communities established along it that are used to having, you know, like this waterway running through it and, transportation running through it. And they're like, you know what, we could just put a railroad on top of this corridor. So they sell it to the railroad 2 years later. Um, for, well, okay. So it cost them $6.8 million to construct and like do all the repairs to maintain the Genesee Valley Canal. So look, how much do you think they sold it to the railroad that was to be put on top of it for? Do you think it was like $1 million? Or maybe $500,000? Or maybe $100,000? $50,000? $30,000? Less than $12,000. A $6.8 million canal sold for $12,000. Takes them whole 2 years to make it. And when they lay this railroad on top of it, which is originally called the Genesee Valley Canal Railroad, you will most likely see it referred to as the Pennsylvania Railroad or the Rochester branch of the Pennsylvania Railroad, because that's what it became known as later on. And it's less confusing than Genesee Valley Canal Railroad. They did not include the side cut to Dansville, and they did not include anything past Hinsdale, New York, and that's why those sections are not included on the Genesee Valley Greenway today. It's because they haven't been used since like the 1870s. All right, so now going around Letchworth, clinging to a canyon. So again, the first like 40-mile section is pretty smooth. This is the most financially successful section of the canal. This was the section that was open the longest, this one that had the least amount of like engineering difficulties. This is where most of your passenger traffic would have been, because there are so many locks and it takes a certain amount of time to get through the locks. It wasn't really, it didn't really save you time to go through a ton of locks. So passengers would use other forms of transportation, and it was more so for like lumber and things like that that would have been used for. But that first 40 miles, not a ton of problems. Then you get to this 12-mile section that goes around Letchworth State Park. So this is Letchworth today, and then this is where the Genesee Valley Canal went. And it has to go up 550 feet, which again is the height of Archery Field Overlook in 12 miles. So this is a little sketch. This is the river. This is the canal, and this is the canal as well. And then all these little notches on it indicate locks. So within these 12 miles, there are 50 locks to try to skirt right up around the park today. So if we look at Trail 7 on this map of Letchworth, and again, here's kind of the Finger Lakes Trail before it branches off, and you go to this little area, this little awkward arm that sticks out of Letchworth Park property. These are the Oakland locks. And then you can see how it's back to back to back to back to back of like there's 5 or 7 in a row, and this is kind of the best section to get a feel of that staircase effect that they would have been working on to achieve it. That's kind of what they look like. And then kind of another thing about the locks is that like I said, there were over 100 at some point. There's less than 15 you can see along the Genesee Valley Greenway today. And if you might have clued in on this, but I referenced a few times that like our best lock and our best aqueduct, all of that is on the northern end. And part of that is because when you think it's going to take you 5 years and it takes you 26 years to make a canal, you might start off thinking we're going to use the best materials possible. We're going to use the finest stone, and then as you go along, you get cheaper with your materials. So the stone on the northern end in Rochester is like a nicely made stone. And then a lot of the locks were composite locks, so they were part stone and wood. They had these like wooden beams within them, like the ones that you will see in the Oakland lock areas. And then in the southern section, sometimes they just made locks entirely out of wood. So as you can imagine, the wooden ones are not around at all. And then a lot of the blocks for the locks were repurposed for railroad infrastructure, or like used for other things, or just kind of ignored because it takes a while for things to be considered historic, quite frankly. And then you can't take back what was already done. So this is a photo of one of the locks in the 1970s, and you can see way more of the wooden beams in there that have since deteriorated. All right, so as if going through 50 locks in 12 miles isn't enough to get around what is Letchworth State Park today, then we have what is known as the deep cut. So this is a half-mile section. So like half mile takes you like 10 minutes to walk-ish. That is as wide as Middle Falls and about as tall as Upper Falls. And it required 600,000 cubic yards of glacial soil to be removed by hand because they don't have fancy equipment in the 1840s and 50s, just to continue on with this canal. And this is what it looks like in the winter. You can kind of see that shape, the cutout shape, and then where the snow would be in, and then in the summer. I do like including a lot of winter photos or off-season photos because I think you can see the landscape a lot better. And then I try to include some summer ones so you can get an idea of what it would look like during more of the touristy season. And if that wasn't enough to get around the Letchworth section, then we get to the tunnel, which is just one of my favorite stories ever. So this is Litchfield State Park as we know it today, looking at Middle Falls. But if we were to travel way back in time to the area around when the park's namesake, William Pryor Letchworth, saw it, it would look significantly different. Kind of around the same spot. So we see there is a pedestrian bridge here. There's a dam behind it. There's a lot of industry from like lumbering. This famous wooden bridge in the back actually required, depending what account you read, between 200 to 300 acres of wood to make it. So you would have cleared out the surrounding area to do so. And up here is where the Genesee Valley Canal would have been. So if we were to jump on top of that old wooden bridge and look on down, this is the view that you would have seen back in the day. Again, they literally decided to put a canal next to the side of the canyon. We'll never get over this. I refuse to. So this is the inspiration point today. And then if we were to head on back in time, again, that's the canal literally on the side of the cliff. So the engineer who got the contract to do this section along Letchworth and to make the tunnel, because, one second. Initially, they were planning on taking about 1,000 meters, I want to say, and putting a tunnel on the side of the cliff. And then as time went on, they decided to just put it on the side of the cliff. And to do that tunnel project was Elijah Johnson, and he had done a whole bunch of architect work in Rochester. He was a mayor in Rochester at one point, and then he decides to move out to the area and work on this canal project. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna live here. I want to make myself a nice home, and I'm already known for being like this cool architect and all that. I can't just have a regular home, okay? I'm going to make what is known as Hornby Lodge, and so this is a wooden like lodge building. It's between 2 to 4 stories, depending what account you read. It's got 8 sides to it, um, and there's a tree in the middle of it, like roots in the ground, branches going all the way to the ceiling of this lodge. And then there's a spiral staircase wrapping around this tree. And then there's all these like weird taxidermy in it, and all the furniture is made from this wood with lots of knots, like and stuff like that. Which sounds really cool. And lots of canal commissioners and politicians and like his friends are there. And famous painter of the day, Thomas Cole, who is known for the I'm gonna mess this up, like the Hudson River School of Art, for kind of starting that art movement. He is a guest at the lodge and he decides to paint it. So this is from Inspiration Point, and then the lodge is right up there, where he would have put it. And also, Elijah's daughter decides to get married there. Reportedly, she did it in winter for some reason because all of the guests got caught in a snowstorm and hung out there for like 3 days. But they probably didn't mind because it was a really cool view and a really cool lodge. But you know, it wasn't there very long. It was actually there for less than 10 years because when the tunnel project fell through, uh, it kind of got in the way of this lodge and they just decided to tear it down. So this wonderful, beautiful lodge, not a lot of people really saw. So here's them kind of, you can see the indent putting the tunnel on the side of that canyon. And so yeah, so initially, I'm sorry, I've got myself a little bit out of order with this part. Um, when they're making the tunnel, they were kind of gonna go in here and then go out in either direction. And so what they did in the beginning is they'd have their aprons and they would fill it up with rocks and then kind of throw it off the side of the canyon. And then they got in further and further until they could bring like equipment, like wagons and things like that, into the tunnel to form a tunnel for the canal to go through the side of the cliff. They had a lot of issues with it. And then the stop law came about. And then for 5 years, the tunnel just sat there crumbling. And then they resumed work on it. And a landslide happened and killed 13 workers. And that's when they decided to just put it on the side of the cliff instead. So that tunnel had cost them $250,000. And they're like, well, we can spend $100,000 and finish it, or we can put the canal on the side of the cliff for $30,000. So to answer the question as to why would you put a canal on the side of the cliff, the short answer is it saves $70,000. But the tunnel wasn't very stable, and neither is the side of the cliff. So you can kind of see that a little more in this section in the distance. It kind of looks like a wooden structure. And that is, I found some better images of this fairly recently. So this is Middle Falls from the side to kind of orientate yourself. And then this is an old image. And then if you look in the back, that's also this wooden structure. Because this area on the park is known as the slide area. So here's it in the winter. You can see there's a lot of vegetation. And then it gets to this point and it's basically a landslide. It just slides on down. Again, kind of the same thing in the summer, just more visible in the off season. And it is literally next to Middle Falls. So you can see it very clearly when you're there. And then I recently found these images of the slide area not too long after the railroad that replaced the canal was there. And then I was like, oh, this is why they call it the slide area. You can see so much debris just pouring on down in the late 1960s. So much so, actually, that there was a designated piece of equipment to take all the materials that were sliding and dump them into the river during the railroad days because it just happened so much. So back in the canal days, there was wooden structure built into the side of that canyon to help support the canal. So naturally, over the years, people have been curious about this bat cave, about this tunnel, and would go and explore it. So here's some people doing that in the 1950s. From the inside, what it looks like in the tunnel. And then some ice formations, some cool ice formations popping up. And then in the 1960s, there's actually a gentleman in the front here. He does blend in the background a lot. Some scientists went in there to really evaluate it, and they're like, you know what? This doesn't seem like the most stable environment for people to be coming in and exploring. We should not let the public go in here anymore. But it is a really great environment for bats. So today, the tunnel, the canal tunnel, the failed canal tunnel, is a bat cave, and you very much cannot get in there unless you have special keys. And this is what it looks like from Trail 7. You can walk up to it if you want. And I think this is hilarious because New York State spent $250,000 on this failed tunnel, which in today's money is $10 million. They spent $10 million on a bat cave. And then if you were to head again to Inspiration Point, this is kind of the walkway from the parking lot and just right there. You can actually kind of see all this stuff. So that ledge, that like shelf is where the canal and then the railroad would have been. You can see the bat cave. It's more obvious in person, the entrance to it. And you can also see, well, this is kind of roughly where Hornby Lodge would be. So a little more, if you don't feel like being as adventurous, you can just drive and look, show somebody, tell them some cool things. So the canal had another obstacle as it was leaving the park. It had to cross the Genesee River. So how do canals cross rivers? One of the options is an aqueduct. So these are the remains of the Portage Aqueduct today. So this is the south side of the park. So over here, continuing would be Upper Falls. And then over here is like Portageville. So this is the remains of the canal. And this bridge in the back is like that 15 mile per hour turn that's really tight. And then that like the FLT entrance is right over here. And that's it kind of from the side. And this is a gentleman on one of our hikes in the park, right up next to some of the structures of that one of the abutments from the canal, so you can get an idea of how big it was and how much effort had to go into constructing this. So these are the remains, but you're probably curious if there are any real photographs of it, and there are. So again, this is the same side. This is the Letchworth side, and this is the Portageville side. And I've never seen like a photo of an old aqueduct that was not leaking. It's another source of water loss for this canal. And then on the other side, you can kind of see there's some of the like erosion barriers, I'm assuming, over here, and then not on the other side. And then some side angles too. And then, we did all that. That was just getting around Letchworth. There is still 60 miles of canal to go, and it still has to go up like 350 feet, which is no small deal. And a lot, canals need water. And a lot of the Genesee Valley Canal was made next to the Genesee River, which makes sense, Genesee and Genesee. And then it does eventually split away from the Genesee River. But the thing about using the Genesee River as a water source is it's not very consistent. Um, so here's kind of the old canal. Here would be the old railroad. Here's the river. Here's Route 19. This is a shot of Letchworth, and these are taken 6 months apart from each other. Sometimes there's so much water going through that river that it's actually causing a problem for the canal because it's flooding it. And other times there's so little water that can be provided to the canal that the canal is dry and boats are stuck in it, sometimes for weeks on end. And canalers did not have a reputation of being really nice people. They tended to get into like fights a lot and drink a lot, and you know, that was just kind of the culture. And also, the Genesee River is flowing north to Rochester. And if there's not enough water to go to Rochester, that means that the mills in Rochester can't exactly work either because all of the river is being sapped for the canal. So obviously, people are not happy about that. So it did cause some problems and need some engineering solutions to get some more water. So on this southern section of it, one of the reservoirs made was Cuba Lake. It was called Oil Creek Reservoir back in the day because after the canal does split away from the Genesee River, it goes along Oil Creek. And it was constructed in the 50s. At the time, it was the largest earth-filled dam in the United States. And it was raised a few times and then lowered since, and it is still used recreationally for this day. You can go walk along the dam if you want to. If you go in the winter, you'll probably see some people ice fishing. But that whole huge reservoir was not enough water for this, so they made two more, Issawa, which is no longer there, and Rockville Lake, which is a lot smaller. And still, sometimes this was not enough water to keep this canal that decided to go up 1,000 feet up a hill full. So that's kind of an overview of the canal and its technological challenges. Was it a failure? It was not a great decision financially, but it did serve the communities that it went through, and it did provide a corridor for the railroad. And it did provide the infrastructure for what we have as the Genesee Valley Greenway State Park today. Um, so kind of also the process of what you're literally looking at when you're looking at the Greenway today is they put the railroad on top of the canal, but they usually put it on top of the towpath, but not exactly. So this is, you can kind of see the railroad and then that indent where the canal used to be. But the thing is that canals and railroads do not actually bend at the same angle. So sometimes we'll be walking along the Greenway and that canal prism remains are going to be on this side, and sometimes they're going to be on this side, and sometimes you're going to be in the middle of it and you might just see a little indent here and there, and sometimes you're not going to see the railroad at all because it took a different route. And this is actually really apparent in the Oakland Lock section, because if you notice this map up here, this is the canal trail, and then this trail up here is the old railroad trail. So this is a topographic map. This is the canal. You can see the locks pattern here as it continues on. I'm just going to move my screen over there. And this is the railroad as it takes a different route and heads up the hill. And then this like massive indent over here, that's actually the deep cut where they had 60,000 cubic yards of soil removed. And I don't know as much about the railroad as I know about the canal, but I do love some comparison photos. So here are some side by sides. Again, this is from the bridge back in the day, looking down where the canal would be, and then where that railroad would have been placed right afterwards. Why, oh, why did they put it next to a cliff? Again, is baffling to me. This is in Mount Morris, where the railroad would have gone. And then for years, this is kind of what it looked like. No bridge, just kind of some abutments. And then I believe in the early 2010s, they put up this guy, that pedestrian bridge that you see today. So over here would be the Mount Morris entrance to Letchworth State Park. And then over here is Al Lorenz Park. And then there is like kind of where the FLT North End ends in the Letchworth branch of the FLT. I always say this wrong, Sonia, State Forest. This is an image of the railroad going through it, and then you can kind of see the indent to the right of that of where the canal would have been. This is Keshika Creek Falls hike today. Again, walking on that old railroad, you can see some washout. And then there's another image from the 1970s of people exploring. I'm thinking this is a very similar spot. This looks like the old railroad to me, and you can see some remains of Canal in the creek, which I haven't seen there anymore because it's been 50 years. Inspiration, again, railroad versus modern picture. Kind of what it would look like. And this is from Trail 7. So you can see today kind of the indent on the right, which would have been the Canal Prism, and there's lots of like railroad ties too that I will see along it. And then back in the day, going underneath that bridge. And then the process of becoming a greenway. So the railroad was abandoned in slightly different sections, not necessarily all at once, but by 1963, it was pretty much abandoned. And the northern section got bought up by Rochester Gas and Electric, or RG&E, and they used it to put their electricity lines. And then in the 80s, ownership between like DEC, Office of Parks Recreation, uh, acquired different parts of it. And again, in the 90s is when that movement for becoming a trail and like repurposing canals as trails came about more so. So in 92, the first 2 miles are opened up in Mount Morris. The following year, Friends of the Genesee Valley Greenway is formed. Um, and then in 2011, it officially becomes a state park. So this is a baby of a park. It's very new. It's got a long way to go. And because different sections have been owned by different people and different groups over time, it's not 100% complete. So the northern section, a lot of that was owned by RG&E, so you will see some electricity lines on it today, versus in the southern sections that might not have been maintained as something necessarily. So you'd have to kind of reclaim that, or in some sections, it's right up against the Genesee River and it's eroded where it would have been. So as with any long distance trail project, it just takes a long time. So yeah, it's a 90-mile corridor today, about 70 miles of trail. And it crosses 5 counties, and you can use it any time of year and for a lot of different things. So this is what the Greenway looks like today. This is in Scottsville, near the northern end, so you can see that old railroad. And then some remains of the canal that's a little filled in. And then on the other end in Belfast, again, the old railroad. And then this one you can clearly see where the canal would have been. Lots of beaver activity in this section. Right above Letchworth in Cuylerville. Again, the RG&E lines. And the old canal over there. And then you're probably familiar with this view of Letchworth looking at Upper Falls. So if we were to hop up over here, I got my last few slides of the day because I love myself some transformation photos. This is what it looks like today on trail number 7. Pretty cool spot. It's a fun spot to go, and then you can look at the people on the Gorge Trail and wave at them, and they can wave back at you and think, how did you get there? How do you know about this secret spot? Trail 7. And this is it back in the railroad days if you were to wind back in time from the same spot. This would have been late canal days from the exact same spot. And this would have been, again, even earlier canal days. And then this last image is my absolute favorite I've ever found. I was looking through the archives in the summer and I came across this and I just kind of like stopped and, got chills because I felt like I could pet the water and like give the beams of the bridge a hug. Like it just felt so clear and real of this thing that very much existed and did a lot of things, transported a lot of objects and people, and that it was there and I could just see it. I didn't have to imagine much. So that image really sticks with me. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I do programs along the Greenway for state parks as well. So if you want any information on like when they are or how to get updated about that, just let me know. And I think it's a small enough group that you can probably just turn on your microphones if you have anything that you'd like to say.
I
Yeah,
didn't. Oh, good.
yeah, this is Peggy. With the aqueduct, I'm like totally confused. Like I know the locks bring the boats so they could get, like you said, uphill. But what, like if you have an a aqueduct, does the boat have to go around it, or like how does the boat and the aqueduct work together?
That's an aqueduct. So it just goes right over here.
So it just goes over it.
Yep.
Okay.
It's like a bridge, but instead of just like a car going over a bridge, it's just water going over top of water.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Ah, you're good. It's confusing, especially since a lot of the historic photos you can't like see the water because they're taken from the side, or the remains are, don't show it.
Yeah, the remains are just like that's
Yep.
why I couldn't figure it out. But it does seem like a whole lot of work for a whole lot of money that didn't last very long at all. Is that typical of all of the canals throughout the state?
I did forget to mention on that. So out of, let me find its side. So here are the laterals. Today it's Erie, Champlain, Oswego, and Cayuga Seneca. And then the rest of them were abandoned around the same time that the Genesee Valley Canal was.
Huh.
Yeah, so this is according to this map at least, all the red ones are ones that were made that are not there anymore.
So maybe at least it wasn't just New York State that spent a lot of money on canals that no longer exist.
No, but then there's the railroad era, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I actually I was confused for a while because the railroad that replaced the canal was called the Genesee Valley Canal Railroad initially before it became known as something else. And I was like, why would you call it the Genesee Valley Canal Railroad? Like a canal railroad? This is so confusing. And then I found out it's because there was another railroad on the other side of the river called the Genesee Valley Railroad. Like there was just like the canals are a lot, and then if you get into railroads, there's so many more. And then a lot of those aren't really there anymore, and then I don't know, or like thinking about malls and how they appeared and disappeared and retail stores, and it seems like something works, and then collectively everyone's trying to get in on it, and then, how permanent is its success going to be? You don't really know until enough time passes.
Awesome. And did anybody else have any other questions?
If you want like a modern example of an aqueduct, can you see my screen if I like switch? That is just a zoom or no?
Yeah, we can see your screen still.
Okay, I'll just go into like a blank one.
I think we might still be seeing your slideshow. in
Okay,
PowerPoint.
I'll switch it over when I find
Gotcha.
kind of, yeah. Okay, let's see. So if I stop share and then reshare just my search, yeah. Can you see just the Google search?
Yeah. Awesome.
This is an active one in Medina today, which I didn't realize on the ground, but like this is the Erie Canal today, and then this is Oak Orchard Creek going underneath it. But it's not super obvious when you're just kind of like walking on it necessarily. A lot of canal stuff I find aerial views really help.
Thank you for the presentation. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was awesome.
I felt there was definitely I'm like, oh, I could have been smoother on that. So but I was trying to kind of talk about more of the section where it does interact with the FLT.
Oh yeah, definitely. And this was fantastic. Like I had no idea that there was even a canal that like was, that used to exist there, and it was really cool like history of that area even just through the
Yeah.
lens of the canal. But awesome. If nobody else has any questions, I think we could probably end it there. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Jules.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
You too.